start the recording. Yeah, so I will ask you to present yourself shortly and say your name and where you are now. Mm-hmm.
Well, hello again, because I know we've come from the background of having a brief conversation prior to this, so that's been really helpful. Mm-hmm. I'm Billy Desmond. In my language of birth is Limo Dazunik, which I want to place here. I'm an Irish person. And at the moment I'm on the west of Ireland, which I am looking out almost towards the Atlantic Ocean. So I'm around 200 meters from the Atlantic Ocean. And it's a beautiful morning here, Camilla, right now. The sun is shining. There's fairly clear skies, blue, and the ocean's like a lake this morning.
Wow.
So it's been a really lovely start to my morning here. So that's kind of the context of where I am geographically. Mm-hmm. I am a cisgender man. I identify as a white Irish in that. I'm also a queer man, and I'm married to a man in a relationship with for 26 years. So, and I work as a Gestalt therapist, supervisor, dialogical educator, inquire into the world, and it kind of informs how I've lived in the world and continues to do so.
Yeah, I'm still with this ocean and nice sunny weather outside, because it is a beautiful day outside here too. We haven't mentioned that before in this conversation we have before the recording, which is a great asset and support for, I mean, not only for this conversation, but yeah, for a day ahead. Because it's been rainy day. There's been rainy days here, so I will take a look later of this Western Island, because I am not that good at geography. But the conference was was to be held in the neighborhood, or
around 6 kilometers from where I live.
Okay. Yeah. Wow.
The conference that didn't happen was meant to happen in this region, in a beautiful part of the world. And you said you were drawn to the ocean, the weather, and it's this part of the world is a very feminine part of the world. So the feminine is kind of intrinsic into the land and the water and our culture. So it has a sense of expansiveness as well.
And yeah, I wanted to ask you something about this. I forgot. But this is where you also work. Or you?
Yeah. So I'm a worker within the institute here, the Gestalt Institute of Ireland, which is not based in this part of the country, but on the island of Ireland. And I work between here and London. So London is also, and has been really a part of my growing up and home for 26, 27 years. As I've got a bit older, I've got an opportunity to spend more time here and to work from here as well.
And how long, that's the thing I forgot, how long have you been living here?
In Ireland, more or less like I've been here, returned here around 20 months ago for most of my time, for around 70% of my time. So prior to that, I was living primarily in London. I had lived in the Czech Republic and lived in New York in my early 20s and late 20s for a period of time. But I grew up in London in many ways, in who I am in the world and how I identify in the world. And I suppose came to know myself by living in a very multicultural city with lots of possibilities of feeling my difference with difference, which I feel very privileged to have had experienced. So yes, I've been very privileged, and it illuminated my life, you know, coming from a country where I left as a sexual exile. You know, I left because of my sexuality after university, after college, third level education, because it was illegal to be a gay man. When I left in 1989, I was a criminal. So legislation didn't change in this island until 1993. So I was unable to stay on the land I was born into and born from. And yet, you know, I meet you today, having been at my husband's niece, her wedding to her female partner yesterday in a time of COVID. So it was also, you know, what a different Ireland it is. With all, you know, it's COVID time, so there wasn't many people there, but we had all generations there, and it was just a very celebratory, moving event. I still get moved by these encounters.
Yeah, I imagine. Yeah. And if you could develop a bit, because the things you already said, because my question is exactly about how would you describe yourself, who you are in this world, what your values, qualities, passions are.
Yeah, I kind of move around, as you say, because it's so alive for me in how I move through the world, and also how available I am to allow the world to move through me. So my values are shaped by my identity and my history, both being of a history that is of a country that's been colonized, and living with the kind of intergenerational trauma of being colonized and no longer is, or parts of it would be perceived as being still. And then living in a nation which was attributed to be the colonizer, and finding my way in that as a place of being held in my difference by those that would have seemed to oppress me at one point, created a space for me to find myself. Has been quite a journey for me in having to reevaluate how I see another in the world. So I say that, I guess, because it's a way of over time really giving myself the possibility to enable me to see the other, is how I also am allowing myself to be seen. So there's a kind of a value I place in the sense of a desire to be transparent, to be available, to be open, to be honest, and yet in the hope that will support I to see the other more clearly and the other to see me more clearly in our difference, and yet also know that's a dance, because there is the risk of I being threatened or threatening. So some parts of my identities may have been held in the shadow in some contexts. And I find that even navigating the psychotherapeutic communities, that has been so in some cases for me. So that's been part, I think, that kind of sense of movement's been really important. That informed how I orientate myself in the world. And then there is a part of me which I do this because it's never far away, and I have to kind of pay attention to this part of me. There's very much a very strong part of me. It's quite an activist, you know. I'm being a queer man. I'm being very public early on. I'm very public with my husband in places that we weren't always received well. He's a very public figure in his own field and took great risks, and I was there to support him in that, and I joined him. So there's something around feeling a responsibility to others that were less privileged, and to give them a voice and give their experience some witness by us. And I speak from I participating in a way that was giving witness to another form of relationship and love. And that's very close to me, around the sense of my desire for equality across relational statuses, across the genders, across how people orientate in not identifying with a particular gender, and the intersection of those kind of different aspects. So that's quite close to my heart, and I feel kind of I can feel that in my skin, my body, as I say that. It's very close to my skin surface, this part of me. And I place a deep value on justice, knowing that I have to pay attention to my acts of injustice and my microaggressions in the world. So, you know, the families I come from, either family of origin or families of choice, they have experienced injustices in different ways, whether it's through class or language or skin color, or faith or gender, sexuality, or non-binary identities. So this kind of attention to justice is close at hand to me. And, you know, I grew up born into a Catholic environment. I mean, you live in the land of Poland, so culturally, I guess there's a kind of cultural Catholicism. And whilst I struggled with that aspect of my identity and its meaning for me, and I grew up and really immersed in a Catholic context, in a rural context in Ireland growing up, it gave me a real sense of the commitment to justice, to really inform my social justice, my way of looking at relationships in the world, and my commitment to endeavoring for equality, even though I don't know it's an unequal world. And I keep getting revisited by that, because, you know, in my own family of birth, I have people of color who are members of my family, who are partners of my brothers, and I've got nephews and a niece who are not white. And so it's really kind of in that kind of perspective, I've been continually challenged to pay attention to my desire for justice, and yet to continue to grow around my developing these anti-racist stance, or my kind of hints of sexism that can be there, or my hints of own homophobia that can be present in myself, or my own heteronormative structures I think I had dismantled, and I find myself going, oh God, I've just reinforced that. Mm-hmm. So that kind of attention to living is key for me, and exhausting at times. And I think sometimes my friends experience me as being, you know, just chill out, Billy, you know, hey, relax, chill out, you're too heavy. So there's also the part of me that can play. So I know there's this part of me that is, I enjoy the play and the spontaneity, and so I place a kind of a desire from, I think that's where my love of movement comes in for me in the world, as a way of knowing, because it enables me to feel myself in the moment more kind of spontaneously. That allows a possibility for joy for me.
Yeah.
So I suppose the only thing I add is just like, so that kind of place of encounter of you know, we talk about the relationship. That's a delicate dance for me. This thing of movement, and I'm kind of calling on some of my kind of, I would say, my teachers, educators, people I've read, you know, like the likes of Merleau-Ponty here, from a philosophical perspective, Rula Frank's work, Dan Bloom, Franceschetti, Margaret Spagnola Law, kind of present for me around some of these things, around this kind of movement, is that, you know, movement is the first language of the world. And I really get that the older I've got and the more diverse cultures and people I've had the joy of encountering, where I found moving with and moving became a foundation for contact, and then became a foundation for relationship in some cases. In other cases, it became a possibility for a moment of relational encounter, but not necessarily a relationship over time. Mm-hmm. So I really value kind of developing my embodied, moving ways of knowing in the world as a support for me, before a language, because I kind of know my intellectual limits and possibilities, and my body is a support for that. My whole bodily knowing with you even now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's a nice way of putting it. Yes, the last thing you said. It's inspiring for me. Would you like to add something to that?
No, am I making sense to you? Am I some sense to you? Am I making some sense to you as I talk?
Yes, of course. And I was also specifically interested in what brings you joy, what makes you, joyful. Yeah.
Touch.
Yeah.
Touch of another with consent.
Uh-huh.
The touch of nature, or allowing nature to touch me. I feel kind of moved as I say that. The touch of your smile right now. I can feel myself being moved when I include you in the imagining of touch of people I care and love, the touch of nature and the touch of your smile. So touch is really, I'm doing this, it's important, it's a part of me in different ways. Movement and dancing recklessly in the world with abandon, with being close to the earth in that way, moving close to the earth with people or by myself gives me great joy. Being immersed in the ocean, swimming naked in Mother Nature, being wrapped in this water that sometimes is cold, enlivening about it. I feel it. I can feel my aliveness and the gift of my life, and the joy in that, in those moments. Sex gives me joy at times. I love sexual play in a way that's joyful and creative and imaginative, and with a care of the other, and knowing that I'm too cared in it. So when those are there, that gives me wonderful joy. Something I foster and feel kind of proud that it's available for me at this point in my life. As opposed to when I was growing up, that wasn't available to me. And dialogue, conversation with people of difference, and across different boundaries of experience. And I love to learn. Learning's a joy for me. I see myself as kind of an experience. I experience myself as somebody who's continually learning. That fills me with a sense of joy, but also a sense of kind of it kind of reminds me of my ordinariness. For sometimes in my moment, I think it's a moment I can be a bit of a peacock going, oh wow, this is fantastic. There's something once that's available, there's something about the ordinariness which I feel can be, which is has a different quality of joy for me. I'm another human being with you now in this kind of shared humanity in some way, trying to figure out how I'm going to move along to the next with your help or not, you know.
Yes, so let's move on. So how did you come to Gestalt world, Gestalt therapy? How did that all start?
Through my own personal therapy.
Mm-hmm.
In my 20s. So I was in an existential crisis, I guess. I was out as I would have identified as a gay man then at that point, or I'm a queer man. I was struggling with my sense of who I am in the world as I identify as a man, as a cisgender man, and my gayness and what I wanted to do. And I really came up against a sense of hopelessness. I felt this real sense of, in my mid-20s, a real sense of just void, a real hopelessness. I was also born into an era, you know, where AIDS was still present. So I also had friends who were really ill. And my husband, he wasn't my husband at the time, my partner at the time had lots of friends who had died of AIDS. So that was also, I think, part of what gave rise to this kind of existential kind of, at 25, I was becoming close to some people. And there was one person in particular, James Pettigrew, beautiful man. And we became really close and he died. And I think it was something around that moment of, before that, when I started to crumble, something started to crumble in me. And I became disillusioned with how I was living in the world and knew that wasn't enough. So yeah, so it was through personal therapy. I happened to find a therapist who had Gestalt therapy as a part of her training, but was not truly Gestaltist, but it was a flavor of it. And then I had my husband, now my husband Bernard, who was very much involved as an activist in issues of social justice around LGBTQI rights and gender issues in a very toxic environment at times. And that also was a part of I was being invited into a world where I was having to really think and feel how I wanted to participate, how I was choosing to participate in the world. So that's how I came into Gestalt. And then I started reading, in that kind of arena. And came across the works really of Paul Goodman and Laura Pearls, as well as reading Pearls's, but I found him a difficult character because of what was depicted on what you could get at the time. But it was a more kind of, I'm going to say the anarchist side, of Gestalt therapy theory that drew me to it. And it's also its really sense of paying attention to the societal issues of the time and how some were responding to that. And that seeing the idea that therapy was a social therapy, and that really meant a lot to me, that it wasn't just another form of this solipsistic person just for myself. Because in some ways, I think the environment I got myself in was, in my early 20s, there was a lot of that possibility. This is where I'm in a party mode here, It's like I was a teenager. Whoa. And I knew that was not, it wasn't safe to continue in that way. There was something about it became a shackle. But one I thought was a freedom, but I could see it was becoming another form of oppression. So these other writers were beginning to stimulate me in that way. And to be very frank, I didn't understand a lot of what they wrote about. I wish I had that, but I didn't have the foundation. Some of the ideas were kind of interesting to me and gave me the kind of possibility of the next. Yeah. And then I went kind of tightening up because I went along to some different, did existentialism for a year and went, yeah, there's something definitely there. So I'm drawn to existentialism. Even though I'm not a philosopher, but I'm drawn to the kind of clinical application, the application of that in everyday living. I guess that's at that time. While I'm not understanding lots of it at times, and still don't, of course. And then I kind of felt this kind of knowing I spoke about earlier, this embodied way, what I now describe as kind of the embodied or kinesthetic, the animating ways of knowing in the world are very important to me. But there's something that were minimized to me over time because of culture, because of my gender, because of my sexuality, because of how I was identifying. That in some ways I was kind of almost like this relational and social interject was, don't trust that. Because in trusting that, you don't fit in with the heteronormative. Mm-hmm. And then I found Gestalt therapy did pay attention to this sense of the, embodied ways of being in relationship that are part of knowing in the world. So that really drew me to, within the context of what I now would call, the field perspective, that really got me moving in that direction. Because now I felt I had the support, kind of a legitimacy, the support to start to inquire into knowing that wasn't in my use of words alone. I can feel the softness in me as I say that, because that was really a seismic moment for me to have that possibility being presented to me, and then to choose to take up the journey of training as a psychotherapist for 5 years. And there were people I met that made the difference, of course. This didn't happen. So I met people who invited me to feel myself in that way. That excited me, that gave me a sense of the possibility of joy in a novel way in the world. And also that I was very different to at times. And so being able to stay with my difference and to experience their availability to be with themselves in their difference gave me new possibilities, I think, and why I kind of decided to take the next into my training, which was a real eye-opener for me in that ways. And I could see the application of the training as well of Gestalt therapy in the wider social field that was important to me. Because I have done work as an organization development consultant and working in organizations with groups and leadership teams, etc. So I could see its relevance in that context. And also helped me make sense of some of the work some of my friends were doing in a more activist sense. I could kind of make sense of it more, and therefore find my support to support them whilst I wasn't at the front line in that way.
So you immediately started your work as a consultant, organizational consultant, or I wonder, your training started, and you started also to be a therapist at that moment. What did you do, I wonder, at those years of your training?
When I was in my training, yeah, because I couldn't afford to. I had to work as well as to train, which is the case for many and most. I came from a working class kid, so I was the first of my family to go to third level. So, and then now to have the opportunity to go and do a master's was like, wow, even though I was not living in Ireland, I was living in London. So it was. So I knew, I had to work. So I was working as a kind of an internal organizational development consultant within the retail sector. So I was, so that's how I kind of funded myself through my training. And then partway through my training, I changed and then joined a large business school on the edges of it, delivering some programs around the area of executive coaching and organizational change, and working in charitable sectors as an OD consultant, as a consultant with teams. So that's how I kind of supported myself. So I was lucky in that sense, because I did have a job. I had skills that I could bring at the time of my training to keep myself funded. Because I don't know what it's like in other parts of it, but it's very expensive. Yes. I mean, it's prohibitive so I had the privilege of having a good enough job to fund my way through,
Yes.
and the support of a person and my husband at the time going, yeah, go off and do what you need to do for your own growth and development, and your own interest at this point in life. So I also had a sufficient relational support as well.
And did you continue with this kind of work after your training? What were your next with all that you got from the training? What did you do with it later on? I wonder.
Well, so I continued in that field, but with a very clear Gestalt therapy theory way of informing. So I kind of worked kind of part-time in that field, and I was then building my practice in London, in kind of this inner parts of London, in really urban London with mixed populations, where English for most of my clients was not their first language. And there are people from different ethnic backgrounds and different race and different histories.
I will ask you immediately, was it by your choice to work with?
Yeah, my choice. And the choice being, I guess, is that I suppose I identify with the sense of being somewhat on the margins. I know in some ways of constructing, I'm not on the margins. I can be seen as very much in the center. I mean, look at me. In political, maybe kind of experience of being in the center. And I also identify, because of my own kind of identities, as sitting and residing on the margins.
Yes.
So I know that kind of, that perception of my experience of myself and then how I perceived the world I wanted to work in was to try and create a space where I could work with individuals whom I may have thought, or they may have considered themselves in some way, in some ways, on the margins in our society. And I think my background of, I'll go back to this kind of social care and justice is kind of there in it. It's kind of just present. I want to kind of create that possibility for others who are less privileged. I know it was like for me when I didn't have the resources. It was very difficult to find a way into certain things. So that was by a choice, an intentional choice, really. And also being challenged by my friends. In a living in London, people, friends of different groups in different places in the world. Being kind of challenged by them and by my partner, who's quite like that at times in the world. So I felt very challenged on how am I using my time and my space. So I had challenges from different ways as well as my own intent. So I think I need to honor the challenges around me that were part of the mobilizing, to be clear, in that way.
Yes, so I asked you and I distracted you a bit, but I wanted to know that part. And so you worked part-time in this organizational sector or whatever?
Yes, in that kind of, it was the area called, it was a business school that had a consultancy wing in it that was orientated to working, quite informed by complexity theory, by Gestalt therapy theory to some degree, by kind of psychotherapy principles, as well as psychological base. So there was a space in there. And I did that and worked within kind of governmental sectors, the health sector, and charitable sector primarily. But that kind of fitted close with my values, I guess. Well, I know. And there were certain places I choose not to go because this was a consultancy that went wherever they went in the world. And there's certain places I chose not to go and chose not to work with because there was a clash with my values. So there was tension as well. I ended up leaving the organization because there was too much of a tension for me. I got to a point in my life where I couldn't marry some of the work that was happening there with me. I couldn't hold that tension. I couldn't hold that tension.
come back later to that field, or I mean to that, yeah. Well, it's not only business, but organizational field. Have you ever come back to it later on in your life?
I still do a bit of work with groups, like reflective practice groups, and I do some what people would see as I'm doing is executive coaching, but my kind of area is more around the relational aspect of people in leadership roles who are struggling with themselves in their leadership and wanting time to reflect and think and understand what's happening and how they want to occupy that. So I do a little bit of that for those who are working in the health sector in particular, and some charitable sectors, but not a lot, but some. I put a piece of my practice open for that, and have continually done that. Yeah, I think it keeps me linked in some way with the wider, that part which I enjoy, I guess, the part of me kind of feeling of being involved in other parts of society organizationally.
Yeah, because I mean, you mentioned, of course, charity organizations, but I don't know how to put it, because on the one hand, working with marginalized people, and on the other with business, it may, how to put it, it may sound like working with privileged people. And I remember myself thinking of it as some shame around, it's good to be perceived as a person who works with marginalized people, but not so much with privileged. But I believe that it is important. I don't know, I'm not working there, but having those interviews with different people, I am sure that it is important for Gestalt, even though these values are sometimes contradictory with business sector, to be there to provide our values. I don't know, but not in that, I don't know, paternalistic sense. I don't want to. Am I making sense here?
Yes, you are. Yeah. So I suppose in response to what you were saying to me in this dialogue here is that I think that in how I orientate in that space, which is not a very big space, it's like a small percentage of it, is I see that in, let's say, the world that people who may be seen as more privileged because of resources, role, possibilities, etc. There's also some suffering that is there.
Yes.
And people often reach out into, particularly what I'm choosing to offer is at a point when there is a struggle, where there is pain present for them, where there are struggles in their way of navigating themselves in their role in the world, or where they're feeling the weight of responsibility that's projected onto them from the world around them. So I see that there is a function, and in Gestalt therapy theory can provide a space that makes it available for those individuals to explore that with me and with others who work in that field, without necessarily being invested in changing the structures that they arrive from. But I hold the possibility, this is where I suppose I'm not creatively indifferent, is by their encounter with me, that in turns they may bring something of themselves that's now more available back into those structures, which may soften them in some way, if necessary, or make them more contactful, or reawaken the humanity and care in them that is there, but may sometimes get lost. And there's some organizations and people who work and I won't work from. I can't. I find it very difficult in that context as opposed to therapeutically. Somebody came to me from, like, for example, the tobacco industry. I couldn't, I find it very difficult. I couldn't. It's therapeutically different, but if they knowingly came in, or from the arms sector, or for sectors that I think are involved in the oppression or direct oppression of others, I would find it difficult to work with certain governments and or certain organizations who are based in certain parts of the world. I find it difficult. I don't feel safe in entering into that place personally. So if I can't feel safe, how can I be present? So then ethically, how can I be really ethically available to care with the other if I might be fully present? So it became a question of ethics for me around how I can turn up in certain places and spaces in that regard, in that organizational context.
But I understand it that it is also it's in clash with your values.
Yes.
Also, and so I wonder because you started to answer my question about what you did after the training, and I wonder how this all has been developing through all these years, where you are now. What's your Gestalt therapy look like? What's your contribution, specific one? Yeah, to practice. Yeah.
So I'm kind of relieved to say that, because I felt like in this conversation thus far I was focusing on this part, I was looking this way, and it was like this part of my life that has shaped by the history of my early career and organization piece, and I felt myself becoming kind of narrow and kind of going, oh, I don't want it just to be about that. You know, it's an aspect I don't want to disown, but at the same time, it's like my life and my practice feels like more expansive when I look this way. There's all of this part that I have had the privilege and the gift and the joy and the possibility of availing of and being availed to me. So I'm kind of feel myself more expansive now when I kind of in this part of the dialogue with you, in me, at this point in time. I can feel it in my voice as well. I can feel rounder in my voice, and I feel broader in me with you. And I can feel the different quality of my breath, because I'm going, this is how I am now. It's this space primarily, with this here, but with this. So, like my world of practice is filled now with a sense of it's been truly enriched, and I've been enriched, and I've been challenged, and I have changed and grown, mostly after my core training. You know, that's where I've really, my core training gave me a great foundation. I was also involved in group analysis and group relations when I was doing my training. So I found that very helpful as a part of what shapes me in the work and my world. But really was kind of going on and doing other things after, and, you know, getting involved with other educators in the field that really made it quite a difference for me, because that opened it up in a very different way. And AAGT was part of that, or now known as IAAGT, because I felt I had a sense of potential to belong, to explore how I was selfing in the world in different ways. And I was quite struck by, I think, is the generosity of what I would have at the time constructed or seen as my elders, who were generous, who were available, who were some of, I can't say all, but some who felt like they were inviting me to a horizontal relationship in those moments, and had a quality of nourishment and care, and at the same time were willing to challenge and push. So that became a place of excitement, I guess. I became very excited around it. My passion grew then for the theoretical and philosophical aspects of the work that were there for me in my training, but now I was getting to see, wow, there's a richness here that I want to really mine and to hone. So that started to shape my practice then as a therapist, and got really interested in working with groups, and then working as a supervisor in ways through kind of using more embodied ways of knowing and creative ways of knowing in the work. And that became something I've been working, developing, and continue to develop. And quite influenced by the work of Ruella Frank in recent years. Her work has been seminal to kind of help me work phenomenologically and pay attention to the moving of relationship, and to explore and to inquire into that living experience in the present moment with others, and how that becomes a part of the relational field that is of this situation. So that changed my practice, I would say, at another level, kind of deepened it as a practitioner, and aroused my interest in that area more. And then I also worked as a kind of an educator. You know, I'm passionate about creating spaces that are community-based and group-based, to create learning through experience that sit within the academy. And yet I have a kind of and this is my kind of marginal activist sense, I also have this kind of desire to challenge the academy in it. And even though I don't have a doctorate, so it's one of the things I've yet to kind of start on, but I'm still in this place of working with individuals, seeing if we can challenge the academy and hold a scholarly tradition that's practice-based. So that's quite an interest for me personally. And partly because I came from a background of, you know, feeling a sense of shame around my education to some degree because of my early history. So there's a whole story in that for me. And I know I can create spaces that are minimize the possibility for shame, because I know what that's like for myself in the educational space. And I thank that to my journey as Gestalt in therapy, and also thank to some of those I've met who've been part of my own education. And they foster that capacity in me. And that's something very close to my heart, really. And so I've got the luck, I suppose, or the joy of working in Institute in Ireland, which really holds a community-based learning, dear to its pedagogy, dear to its heart, in a master's program over 5 years. And so being part of that and creating new ways of working and learning and starting to research in novel ways is very exciting. So quite exciting at this point in time.
Can I ask you about that more specifically? So these programs are based within, I mean, you say community, but within academia, within university, or can you say more?
Yes, sure. So it's a strange relationship, really, in this kind of jurisdiction in Europe. What we have is the possibility, we've got this institute called the Gestalt Institute of Ireland, which has been in Ireland for around 28 years. Its foundation was in community activism. So they came from a community activist base. So there was always been there. And then around 4 years ago, they established a master. They had always had a core training program for therapists, Gestalt therapists, that was based on a group, I would call it community. They lived as a community. Yeah, they work, learn, and live as a community for 5-6 days, 3 times a year, and they meet for a community for 12, 14 days again. So it's community-based with places in between, and the years work together. So there is all the years come together, live together, work together, learn together. So this kind of ongoing kind of cycle of inquiries around the experience through theory, back into experience and back into practice. So our institute, they developed a master's in Gestalt psychotherapy, and that becomes accredited by a third level institute. So whilst we don't sit within the institute, we sit as a link with the institute, and we are governed, let's say, and accredited by that third level institute, which awards the master's level university degree. So we are now, in the last kind of 3-4 years, been involved in kind of building relationship with the institute to find a ways of enabling our way of kind of learning to be there, which is challenges the more traditional form of education in third level sectors, and for that to be honored and to be supported. Likewise now in kind of the more inquiry, practice-based inquiry, research terrain, they're supporting us in, you know, to explore and to develop ways that may be more relevant Gestalt therapy theorists and practitioners, importantly, to inquire into their practice. That could be of support to them, but support to others. Mm-hmm. And we're beginning to have conversations with other people in other fields because they're interested in how we support ourselves in the work. Mm-hmm. So there's the beginning, we see the beginning of kind of dialogue happening of how Gestalt therapy theory and practice may inform those in other disciplines and support them. Wow. Which goes back to the history of some of our work as Gestalt therapy. We're involved in educational.
Yeah, sure, but I've never heard, I mean, maybe something between the lines about how does the situation look like in Ireland, but now listening to what you were saying, it's impressive and it's exciting and wow, this is how Gestalt could, you know, could be applied. I mean, more systematically. I don't know, systematically or systemic, with all those relations with other fields. Wow.
Yeah, it would be kind of even I like you're kind of moving your hand. I have this imagine, you know, this Margaret Spagnola Lobb uses this concept, I think, of rhizomatic roots, and where they cross over, the sense of rootedness, and I really like that because it reminds me of what you're doing. Reminds me of that. Mm-hmm. Possibilities of these kind of connections like this that stem out into other things that we may not know but have a ripple. You know, they ripple out. So yeah, there's there seems to be kind of an interest in that possibility. It's very early, but there's some interesting conversations happening.
Yeah.
Which
and this thing you are already doing. I mean, like this Gestalt training, which is community based, as you call it. It's also inspiring. I mean, I imagine there are more or less similar, maybe, phenomena in different parts of the world, but not but it's the first time I'm hearing it so clearly and as a ongoing project, so to speak.
It's a real credit to the team that have been there. I'm new to them. I've only joined in the last 2.5 years or so.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so it's a really credit to, you know, I want to name them. It's like the current people, like that's Tricia Norris, who's been there right from almost the early days of it, who has helped it survive and who made it possible. Immense, generous, open, dedicated person who's kind of almost invisible in the world, you know, at times. So I want to name her because I wouldn't be here without her. Mm-hmm. And then there are other colleagues like Dan McCarthy, who trained there, and there's Brenda Boland, there's Catherine Power, and we're now extending our faculty out into people who are not of Irish heritage, into Karina Nemkova, who's of Polish heritage. So, you know, we're really trying to open things up in different ways to represent the island of Ireland, but also to see its Europeanness to be more outward looking. Yeah. So there's quite murmuring of novelty and possibility for the next to unfold here.
Yeah.
But it feels important I name the current people because it's their
creation. This is how I understood it. It was, I mean, I'm glad you named those people, and it was, I mean, I understood it this way as a kind of emergent from this field that you have there.
Yes, and it goes back even further. There was a man called Hank O'Mahony, and there was a Joan O'Leary, who were the founding father, mother persons of that, and they both came from community activist backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think it's amazing how it gets carried through for me, it's kind of interesting and kind of amazing how the DNA, has been really held and even though it's taken on a new expression,
Uh-huh.
the DNA is really held there and nourished and cared for.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, and of course I imagine how intense it is and how much work it requires, and yeah, so
Yeah,
also. Mm.
yeah. I can because I can feel the beginning of my tiredness, coming up, because we've been working a lot in the last few weeks, and we're about to start our academic year this year. So, yeah.
Well, yeah.
It's nourishing, of course, for me as well.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Maybe we are coming to an end, but my question is about maybe some it will be a continuation of what you said partly already, because I'm sitting here with some kind of how to proliferate that what you are there doing into the world, into the other countries, and how is this possible, because it is somehow connected with your history, your culture there, that it is all possible. And I wonder whether you are optimistic about Gestalt future and Gestalt community to expand and to also look onward, outside, but also, I don't know, I don't know how to how to articulate this question, but are you more optimistic about the future of Gestalt therapy and Gestalt community, or you have some doubts, skepticism?
If I move my position from where I'm sitting and move it to kind of a more kind of a citizen of the world position, I hold hope, because there's an awful lot of work happening in different parts of, I'm going to go like South America. I know it's a kind of huge generalization. Immense amount of work has happened, is happening. It's vibrant, alive in places like Mexico and Brazil and parts. So there's a kind of a vibrancy that's there, and that may all be visible to those of us in the English-speaking world, and primarily in English speakers. And then I know there's other kind of countries it's present as well, so it gives me hope in that sense, where there's work being done, and the more translation can happen, I guess, the more it becomes visible to those of us who don't speak several languages. So I think there's something in that, and maybe things that you're doing here, you and Heather, are part of that dissemination of, this is what's happening out there. So I've had that through listening to some of these conversations between you and Heather had with people. So that's a part. So I hold hope in that regard. I do hold hope. I have caution in me as well. And the caution is the sense of around the tension I personally feel in myself. I kind of move around as I say that. It's difficult for me even to maybe to name it, but it's this tension of we're living in a world where evidence and evidence-based practice becomes critical for funding within health sectors in many countries. And I understand that. I understand the need for that in resources. And it seems that there is a part of our kind of research communities is starting to move into that space. And I think that's important, that's supported. where there is large university institutes, where large funding can be got, where that kind of research can be executed, completed, that honors the Gestalt therapy tradition and theory within, to give support. And I also want to hold the tension that causes with our philosophy and our orientation, and how it could risk in a more manualized form of therapeutic work being engendered in the services around. So I've a tension there. So my hope is that there is this, and of course I've got a vested interest in this because I'm kind of interested in looking at novel ways of knowing in the world. I'm not alone, but can we also create the space for looking at emergent ways that we can see research in our practice as inquiry, ongoing inquiry into the living relationship through creative and embodied ways of knowing, whether it's through narrative, ethnography, which people are doing, or ways of knowing that are yet to be developed and emerged that may bring something new to the scholarly tradition. Because each of these traditions came from somewhere. So I have this sense sometimes we take them and we have to fit them in. And I kind of go, well, let's understand them, but can we reach over and see what we can bring to these so we can may have something that's new or novel as well. So that's my hope in that arena, that I don't want that to be diminished or suffocated or not supported. And I think also the importance of this as a philosophy for living is very important. So can we take our work in different ways into different kind of contexts that are both in the therapeutic situation and bring our therapy to those that are less privileged? This is important for me, but also take that work into different arenas, and to take other people's cultural perspectives into our therapy. So I'm kind of, the decolonization of our therapy theory is something I'm kind of have been interested in, because I think our curricula and our work needs real examination on the decolonization of our therapy theory. And that's something that disturbs me, and I'm disturbed by, and I'm glad I'm disturbed by it, let's say. So that's, I think, something that needs a lot of attention. And if that does, I think it gives me hope. And I think it starts off in our institutes and needs to start off in other organizations, very much so. Yeah, I'm hopeful. I see things that, you know, you're involved in, like New Gestalt Voices, which is giving a space for literally new voices, or voicing new and voicing the novelty that may have been familiar, but it's novel here. So I see that as a kind of a space that's really part of the challenging of some of the boundedness that was placed there. So I'm very excited by seeing that creative energy and resource and time and effort being placed in that, and it being nurtured as that space still, that space being held. So I'm very hopeful and excited by maybe the emergence, the growth of that, but also the emergence of other things that may emerge in addition alongside that. So that fills me with hope. In a time in the world that I feel at times quite hopeless at the moment right now. So I'm also with that sadness as we come to a close. I am left wondering, Camilla, you know, I've had the privilege of having had space and time to inquire into who I am in the world. Very privileged. I've had the privilege of time with you here today. Yeah. I feel tearful a little bit because I have a knowing of you from different encounters, and the sense of gratitude to you in that, and to you and Heather, who's there, part of, for me, when she's not here, have created this. And then I'm left with sadness going, even with all of that, I feel impotent at times in the world at the moment. You know, I don't want to just be speaking to those that kind of speak my language. My energy is finding ways of bridging into those where there is a real different worldview, to find a way of building a bridge or building some kind of movement towards. And that is, I'm finding very painful at this time. So I'm kind of with that at this point around the hope, Gestalt therapy. Yes, I'm hopeful in a world that I feel hopeless in. And how can I, and those of us that have the privileging of this as our part of who we are, maybe, you know, runs through me, maybe runs through you and others, to avail it as a support to move towards real sense of difference, to kind of find a way of facilitating a dialogue which at times feels almost impossible to begin.
Thank you, Billy, for for this conversation, for being so attentive to answer those questions broadly and with honesty and with yourself. I don't know, with your sense of yourself in it. Yes.
Thank you, Camilla, for creating the space for me to meander and to move and to to take off in little tributaries off the ocean into a river here and come back onto the ocean of our outside the ocean between you and I, maybe, that we're immersed in.
Exactly. So thank you, and enjoy the rest of this beautiful day.
I will, and you as well, Camilla.
Yeah. So bye bye.
Yes, wonderful. Goodbye for now. Bye bye.
Bye for now.